How did this UFO thing suddenly come into your life?
It was really a quirk. Ned Day and Bob Stogall had broken a really big national story. They had information about a secret plane out in the Nevada desert, and it was invisible to radar. That's what our sources had said.
George Knapp's source was this man, John Lear, famed aviator, son of the founder of the Learjet, and soon to be influential in the conversation on UFOs.
Thanks for being here.
Okay, George.
To begin with, you're a pilot, an airline pilot, captain. You have held 17 different world speed records at one time or another. You're a member of the famous Lear family that all Nevadans are pretty much familiar with.
His father had developed the Learjet, and he had a passion for secret planes. So he and a group of people, they called them the interceptors, would go out into the Nevada desert and would sit outside of Area 51, the Nevada test site, to see what was flying around in the sky.
You don't sound like the kind of guy who would get hooked up in something that a lot of people would say is a bunch of nonsense.
No, it's just by coincidence that I got really interested. This about 2 years ago. My father saw a UFO and my brother did.
And one day, John Lear walks into the news station, this is in 1987, with a stack of documents, UFO documents, and he plops them on Ned Day's desk, and he says, Ned, this is the biggest story you'll ever cover in your life. It's about a cover-up of massive proportions. You're going to become famous. You got to do this story. He pushes the documents over, and Ned starts reading it. He pushes the pile back, and he tells Lear, this can't be true. If this was true, this UFO cover-up, then I'd already know about it, he says. I'm eavesdropping, as I tend to do. And I said, Mr. Lear, let me take a look at that stuff. So I read through it, and at the time I produced a little talk show, a half-hour public affairs show called On the Record.
Well, I wouldn't look at you on the record.
And it would air on Saturday or Sunday morning at 6 or 7 o'clock. And I said, John, you want to do this show? And I put him on, and I just let him go.
I'll give you the bottom line.
Okay,
I'm not trying to sell it.
I want to hear your thesis.
I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to promote a lecture. This is based on what I've come across after intense research in the last year. And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 flagship flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly. They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies in cryogenic storage. We even have the name of the person whose job it is to show these bodies to the heads of state and the people who are authorized to see them. They represent at least 5 different civilizations.
Okay, you mentioned the saucers and the bodies. Now, what kind of proof do you have that is true? How do you know that?
Well, let me take a look. Let me read to you first what the Air Force says about the bodies. First of all, I'm going to read from the Introductory to Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force. This is Chapter 13, Unidentified Flying Objects. Now, this is what the Air Force has the students at the Air Force Academy read. And it says, the most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silver spacesuit or coveralls.
It blew me away. It blew away our audience. I didn't know what to make of it, really. Looking back on the tape of that show, I could see the expressions on my face. Is this for real? Yeah. This guy making this stuff up, he's nuts.
Coming up, opening the vault to decades of UFO bombshells.
April 25th, 1964 was the first official communication between our government and the aliens.
I've had my life threatened by them, my wife's life threatened by them.
Revelations.
What we've learned this week is that the government has lied to us about UFOs, has withheld information, has spied on UFO organizations, and has discredited UFO witnesses.
And steps the government may be taking to keep secrets.
The military has been installing secret sensors on public land surrounding the base.
There's your transmitter right there.
Plus, we set off to find Area 51 for ourselves.
Just turn it off.
Welcome back. UFOs, are they real? We're talking with John Lear on the subject.
The most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls.
I could see the expressions on my face. Is this for real? Yeah. This guy making this stuff up, he's nuts.
Now, I'm not making this up. This is an Air Force. You can pick out an Air Force physics book and read this stuff. And at the end of the chapter, they go on to say, this leads us to believe in the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, or at least of alien-controlled UFOs. The picture that we have of the big head that the Air Force describes, this picture was drawn by an Army surgeon. These are one of the bodies that was recovered in the famous Roswell incident in 1947.
Tell us about that.
It was the first flying saucer that crashed and was recovered by the Army.
Originally, the Roswell Army Air Base announced it had recovered a flying saucer from a ranch outside Roswell. The story made headlines around the world, but hours later, higher-ups said no, it was a weather balloon. Pieces of the balloon were shown to reporters. Years later, the officer who first visited the crash site, Major Jesse Marcel, confided that the weather balloon story was a cover-up.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else, which we didn't know what it was.
What was shown to reporters wasn't what he found.
The newsman saw very little of that material, a very small portion of it. And none of the important things, like these members that had these hieroglyphics or markings on. And when the general came in, he told me not to say anything, that he would handle it.
Since Marcel's admission, scores of other witnesses have also surfaced.
And one of the surgeons that was responsible for the autopsy drew that picture.
This is an autopsy report. You said the government goes to great lengths, the Air Force in particular, to discredit this kind of stuff. Where did this come from? How did you get that?
That came from the private collection of Leonard Stringfield, who was one of the premier researchers. He worked for the Air Force in the early 50s in a secret project reporting UFOs. Then as a civilian, he continued his private research, and this is out of his collection.
Do you think maybe it's a top secret area? If the Air Force actually does have them, maybe they got him here?
I'm certain they do. Up at the test site, there's a report that of the 3 that they got in perfectly good condition, at least 1 is up at the test site and has flown, and 1 was being flown as of 1981.
By us?
By us, yeah.
We mentioned at the top of the show that perhaps a breakthrough might be coming, that some of these people from MJ-12 or from the Project Blue Book who are in on the government's research and who saw some of this stuff might be ready to talk. We got about a minute left. Why don't you tell me about that?
It's our information that half of part of MJ-12 wants to release it, part of it doesn't. We're hoping that we can do this, but of course, as researchers, we're not aware of all the ramifications. We just know of what we're looking at. So we would like to see them release it, but we really don't know if they are.
Okay, John Lear, it's been very interesting. You keep us posted.
Sure will.
Thank you. We'll see you next week with more of On the Record.
And as soon as that aired, I started getting calls, and it didn't stop. What was the deal with that guy? Is that for real? Do you have any more information? Are you going to do that again? I realized this topic touches the pulse of the public in a way that I did not understand and did not appreciate at the time. I had him back on again the following year, and in between I started reading about UFOs, just trying to separate wheat from chaff. It's a gigantic learning curve, and figuring out what makes sense and what's real is really hard. So I tried to educate myself and get ready for that next Lear appearance, and the response from the public was even bigger.
Now, on April 25th, 1964 was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emanator, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. In 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate, and they were faced with 2 problems. Number 1 is they didn't think the public could handle 2 traumatic experiences at the same time, and number 2, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate.
The inevitable result of these charges has been to raise serious questions about the integrity of the White House itself.
So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says,
let's look at an incident that might happen in the future, or perhaps could have happened already.